Need to remember, particularly Democracy Now! Listeners who don't quite understand the scale of grief and outpouring that's taking place right now, is that Kobe Bryant first became part of the public consciousness at age 17 as a high school senior, and he dies yesterday at the age of 41. That means for over half of Kobe Bryant's life, he's part of the public eye, and I think there's this tremendous association that people had with him and with his career. I mean, Kobe Bryant was the kind of player that people felt passionate about. Some people loved him, some people hated him, some people loved and hated him for things that happened on the court, some people for what happened off the court. But over the course of his career, he not only excelled as a player, you know, he was an 18-time All-Star, for goodness sakes, but he was also very much a global athlete. His name was Kobe because his father was a basketball player named Joe Bryant who traveled the world, and Kobe was named after Kobe, Japan, where Kobe played. Kobe grew up in Italy. He spoke fluent Italian. He spoke Spanish. There's a basketball player named Luka Doncic, and Kobe would speak to him in Slovenian. So Kobe had this global appeal, which has led to this outpouring of grief that we see today. And for a lot of folks, as you know, people just thought the second act of Kobe's life was just getting started at age 41. And I think when you factor in the death of Gigi as well, who had aspirations to be a basketball player in her own right, it's almost like this future that people saw for Kobe was just erased in the blink of an eye. And I think that's what people are suffering with right now.
Can you talk now about what happened in 2003, Dave Zirin? What happened in Colorado?
Well, I'll be frank with you. First and foremost, it's difficult to discuss because you want to give people space to mourn right now. And I feel like there is going to be time to discuss all of this. But I also understand that this is part of Kobe's legacy, and it does need to be discussed. In 2003, Kobe was charged with sexual assault. In 2005, the charges were dropped when his accuser did not testify, and Kobe's lawyers absolutely engaged in a scorched earth campaign against his accuser that was so intense they actually changed the rape shield laws in Colorado because they were so vicious towards her. Now, part of the settlement the part of the deal that Kobe, in terms of the civil suit of writing a very large check to make the charges go away, involved Kobe writing out an apology that was read in court, where Kobe acknowledged that he did not think that his accuser had offered consent in their encounter. And I have to tell you, like, I was speaking with, back then in 2005, that hadn't really been seen before. I mean, now I think it doesn't, I don't know how we would look at it in 2020 in our era today, but in 2005, offering that statement where he spoke about the issue of consent. I know that for a lot of organizations that work in restorative justice circles, they've used that statement as a way to speak about the importance of understanding consent and the importance of fighting sexual assault and rape culture.
Basketball superstar and legend Kobe Bryant has been killed today. I'm sure you've heard, in an awful, awful helicopter crash. He was on his way with his daughter and some other children and parents to a game, a basketball game his daughter was playing in, and the other children too. The helicopter went down and all aboard were killed, and it's a terrible thing. I was actually at the gym and I saw this on the screen on the news, and it's one of these things where it's a reminder of just how fleeting and sudden and savage end of life can be, how little we can take the future for granted. And it's a powerful moment, of course, to remind us to live life to the fullest, because you never know when the two wet fingers of infinity are going to close themselves around the little flame of our lives. And I also found myself bothered, because what happens is, you go on Twitter or you watch the news, you go to Facebook, and there's this outpouring of grief and worship and adulation for a man who was really good at putting balls in hoops. And, and the game is exciting and all of that. It's not my favorite game, but it's an exciting game. But he is, he's a highly trained, highly skilled, hardworking athlete. And the worship and the veneration of people for other than their moral qualities, I find to be extremely disturbing. And I think one of the markers of a decaying, or in some ways degenerate, civilization, to really worship and praise people for, to some degree, accidents of birth. I mean, he obviously was born with fantastic genetics. He had a great work ethic too, worked out all the time. But, you know, you and I could probably work out as much, or at least when we were younger, would never have been the basketball player that he was. He just had an immense innate talent and put it to good use, obviously. But this veneration and worship of people and this grieving of people for their capacity to do morally unimportant tasks like kicking balls or throwing balls or catching balls or whatever. I mean, it's, again, I don't want to sound like a complete killjoy. Sports are fun and I enjoy sports, but the idea that there's this, it's sort of like with Princess Diana, which I guess was the stake through the heart of the fairy tale for women, that if you marry the prince, you'll be happy ever after, in which case, well, you'll probably get bumped by a white Fiat and die in a tunnel in Paris. But this veneration, it troubles me. It troubles me because we really should love people for their virtues, not for their talents, their abilities, their singing voices, their looks, their fame, their money, their sports ball expertise is not where we should put our love. And it's almost like, and we have begun to worship people as demigods who are astoundingly skilled in a particular area. We have become like the golden calf. We have become the idolaters of fetishistic talent worship. And that is not good. That is not good, because it's bad for the people who have that talent, because then they get all this worship and this adulation without actually having to be good and moral people. It's bad for us because we think, well, if I want to be loved, Citizen Kane style, what I must do is accumulate wealth or power or money or talents or influence or political authority or something like that. And this is not what grows love. This is not what connects us to each other. Love is our involuntary response to virtue, if we are virtuous. If we are not virtuous, then we have neutral or contemptuous responses to love. Evildoers' response to virtue is to hate it. Good people's response to virtue is to love it. And I don't really know that there's many people who are actually indifferent to it. But it is troubling to see this sort of outpouring of grief and adulation and love and so on to a guy whose moral qualities were highly, highly questionable, but whose skill in handling a basketball was this decision set in their life. They say, well, but there's remorse, and there's change, and there's growth, and there's this, and there's that. It's like, maybe there is. Maybe there is. But I think you work hard to make amends. Maybe he did. Maybe he did behind the scenes. I don't know. But my gosh, I mean, you think of Brett Kavanaugh's life was destroyed by what are, to me, completely false allegations. And then Kobe Bryant's, I think, much more credible allegations against him. Well, he had a lot of money, he had a lot of power, he had a lot of lawyers. And he had the media on his side because, of course, the media likes the fact that he drew in eyeballs for their advertising dollars. His sports agents loved that he made him a huge amount of money. And, I mean, he had whole business interests. He was marketing $200 sneakers, I think a lot of times to poor kids, in my opinion. But anyway, you know, he was a guy who was very good at basketball. He was not very good at being a husband. I mean, he was a self-admitted cheater with at least one woman, and his wife claimed more than 100 more. And he then bought her a $4 million apology ring, right? So, you know, but he'd made a vow to remain faithful to her. And people say, well, but he was a good father. And it's like, I don't know that a good father goes and has sex with a stranger, even if we assume that it was consensual. I don't think a good father goes and has sex with a stranger when he's got a 6-month-old baby at home. Come on. As far as being a good husband, well, you make a vow. He was a Catholic. You make a vow in the eyes of God to be faithful to your wife. And you're supposed to take those vows with about as great a seriousness as you can muster in this mortal plane. That is the point of those vows. And he broke the vows that he made in the eyes of God, at peril to his soul and his salvation. according to his wife, more than 100 times.
The death of former Lakers star Kobe Bryant in that helicopter crash yesterday is wrong on so many levels. It's wrong on almost every level. It's wrong that we almost forget that Bryant and his 13-year-old daughter Gianna weren't the only ones killed in that crash. 7 others died, but when someone the stature of Kobe Bryant dies, he's the one we always talk about. Bryant was a giant in a game of giants. Only 3 men have scored more points than he did, and 2 of those 3 never played the defense that he did either. 20 years in a Lakers uniform, he wore 2 different numbers, and he was so good, the Lakers retired them both. But the media embarrassed itself again in covering the tragedy, as we too often do. Margaret Sullivan wrote a great column about this in the Washington Post this morning. She points out that in our never-ending desire to be first, TMZ breaks the story before the families had been notified. An ABC reporter says all 4 of Kobe's daughters were believed to be on the flight, then says he hopes it's not true, which begs the question, why did he say it if he didn't know? Even the BBC messed it up. They ran pictures of LeBron James while talking about the death of Kobe. And Twitter, in all its glory, illustrated the story with a picture of the sex predator Jeffrey Epstein in their Bryant news. I have been arguing against this insatiable thirst to be first with the story for more than 30 years now. I'd rather be right than first. But it's a game that is played out in every newsroom in America. And outside the newsroom, there's not 3 people in America who know where they heard it first or care. When we live in a world where the media is referred to as the enemy of the people, providing our critics with the ammunition they need hardly makes our industry better. But a man who had the impact he did deserves all the eulogies that are coming his way. He doesn't need to be remembered larger in death than he was in life, but that's what we almost always do. He wasn't a perfect man. There's a woman in Colorado who will tell you he wasn't. But there's not a perfect man among us. I've only even heard of one perfect man, and he was left to die hanging on a cross. Kobe Bryant dies in the hills of California with his daughter and 7 others. He was a giant in a game of giants. Kobe Bryant, dead at 41.